Center of Five Alarm Fire. I'm Dr. Carol. Thank you for joining me in this episode. For many, the five alarm fire today would have to do with gender identity. At least that is the perspective of my guest on this conversation. Addressing this really big and controversial area can stir up a lot of feelings, regardless of where you come to this conversation from. You probably have some feelings just knowing that that's the topic of this particular episode of our program. My guest, Lori Kuykendall, has been dealing with this head on from an education and faith perspective. Lori Kuykendall is president of Beacon Health Education Resources. She has degrees, both undergraduate and graduate, in the area of health education. She has worked as a missionary and been in various dimensions of ministry. Most of her time these days is in the public sphere, but she also does a lot in educating church groups, parents groups, and Christian young people around issues of identity, sexuality, relationships, gender. We are going to be talking about that five alarm fire of gender identity. In this conversation, I want you to notice what the foundation of Lori's perspective is. Because when we start from a faulty foundation, the end result we get to is not going to serve us well. So that's where we start this conversation. And then we talk about what some of the dynamics are in the current gender identity challenges in our culture, our church, our world. Yes, it's an issue for people in the church as well. How do we address that? And then we talk about what can we do about it? How can we put out or address this five alarm fire? So Lori Kuykendall. Lori Kuykendall, it is a delight and an honor to have you on the program today. Thank you, first of all, for your work and then for being here now.
Thank you, Dr. Carol. Looking forward to visiting.
You have been in health education and helping people deal with the topics that we're going to talk about for going on 30 years in a number of different settings, dealing with currently some of the really hot topics. I'd just like to start with maybe just a word or two about how you came to be where you are now. We've got a link in the show notes where people can find out about more about you, but just how did you come to this point in your career, maybe the short version?
Well, sure. I'd be happy to. I started out really my junior year of high school, was attracted to full-time mission work. I did some work in Mexico building houses, and it was there that I had an opportunity to see needs firsthand that I hadn't seen before. Wow. And wanted to be a medical person, a pediatrician, to go and serve communities just like that one where we had built those houses. So headed off to college in pre-med, ready to go on to medical school, but was introduced to the field of health education and the power of prevention. And partially because of the power of prevention, and partially because, oh my goodness, so many more years of school it would have taken me to become a doctor, to be honest, right? But was drawn into the field that was emerging at the time, really of the value of preventive medicine and the value of education and primary prevention, as we refer to it, in terms of reaching people before they are at risk, before they encounter risk. And that happens with young people more so than adults, but I was drawn to put together kind of my background in youth ministry and then this new health education field and serve those where it was most needed. Some of my colleagues were going to be fitness pros or go on to physical therapy. I wanted to go where the need was greatest with that missions heart. So after college, my husband and I moved on to Houston, Texas for his first opportunity and was introduced to the work of pregnancy centers there. I didn't know what a pregnancy center was. I would not have called myself pro-life at the time. But as you know, the long story made short, they wanted to start a prevention program, a program to, as they said, reach the girls before they need us.
Yes.
So I came on there and started a abstinence education program. We would go on and learn to earn Title V federal funding for abstinence education, and started a new nonprofit to do just that. And that's kind of how it all started. And it's been a fun journey since then. Part of that, many of those years were spent raising our four children, and as they grew up farther into schooling and got driver's licenses, and I had a little more time to work outside of the home, was grateful to come back into the field of health education, and specifically sex education and teen pregnancy prevention, all that kind of rolls up with
Yeah.
promoting a Christian worldview of identity, sex, marriage, and family.
Yeah. Well, the medical part of who I have been in OBGYN and your work in pregnancy centers, that resonates with me at a really deep level. Even in recent talk about the overturn of Roe v. Wade, as we're recording this just over a year ago, I think it is important to talk about what happens when the pregnancy test is positive, but we need to do a whole lot more about what happens 6, 8, 12, 18 weeks prior to that. And I'm so glad that you have a heart for that. We're not going to talk about abortion per se, but what I do want to talk about today is a really hot topic. I have some friends in the church I belong to, and the coaching I do through my church, as well as other friends who see the whole gender and sexual identity thing as such a big deal right now. As we get into talking about that, just a mindset question or two. You are a woman of deep faith and have been in ministry for many years. You're also health education and science and faith. And I just like maybe a moment of your perspective on how science plays into how we conduct ourselves as followers of Jesus, and perhaps especially in some of these hot areas.
Okay, I love this question. So, when I think of faith and science, I think of what the scriptures tell us about what faith is. Faith is being assured of what we don't see. So, it's about things we don't see. And science is a study of what we do see. So, faith gives us this understanding that there is more than what we see in science. And
Yes.
yet, the principles of science absolutely support the principles of faith, that God's biblical principles for how we should conduct our lives absolutely align with natural law. There's a lot to say around public health and health education. And we define health as physical, mental, emotional, relational, and spiritual, really those five elements of a whole person approach to health. And I think that's exactly where science and faith come together to represent more than just what is seen, so much more than who we are as people, who have hearts, minds, souls, and bodies. And yet, there are realms in our society where science is the language, is what is spoken, where we don't have the freedom to speak faith. And yet, the truth of health and science is still true, whether we're in the church or outside of the church, whether we're in a faith based setting or a public setting. Truth is truth. And so I've always known that faith and science are together and not separate, that we don't have to take out our faith to walk into a public school setting and teach about health, that these are health matters that align with science and always will, because truth is truth, and we know the one who is the way, the truth, and the life. So it's kind of an abstract, several circles around answer, but it's a fascinating question, and I love that we're able to talk about it on your program.
Yeah, well, thanks, Lori. And I share that. And in a lot of your work is in the public sphere. And having that perspective, I just find very rich. One of the things that is talked about a lot in recent years, especially around the area of gender identity, sexual function, and identity, is this idea of I get to define what I want and who I am. And I've seen some of your work, and you have a problem with that perspective. And I want to give you a couple minutes to unpack that. The self-identification, maybe that's not really as healthy as many people might think.
Well, a loaded question indeed, but a couple of ways I would attack it. One, self-identification puts self in the middle and defines everything else, all other truths and all other matters by self. And that's okay for me, but myself is very different than yourself, is different than the self of the other person. So now we've got a whole lot of different opinions and ideas, and we're trying to operate together in families and communities, and we're going to clash if ourselves are the reference point. There's a term, self-referentiality, which means really I'm the center of my universe and you're the center of yours. It's pluralism, and it's a thinking of things in different ways across our values, beliefs, and attitudes, the things we think are right and true and good about the world, and the things we should or should not be doing. But to me, one of the biggest problems of that is it's very isolating, and we want to be people who are connected one with another and one with our God, that we're made for connection. So I talk about autonomy a lot, or really anti-autonomy, that we were not made to just be, individual people operating in an individual world. We were made for connection. So what we need then is an objective center for which we are all revolving around. So when we're thinking of the planets, that's the sun. When we're thinking of human beings, that's God and his son, the center, the creator of the universe. So I think the problem is we've got to move away from self. So much emphasis, I mean, name the self word, self-esteem, self-worth, all of those things
Yeah.
can be helpful and yet can be dangerous if we take them too far and put me at the middle of my world. Me at the middle of my world is a pretty frightening thing. It may feel good for a few moments, but I think particularly about children, that they need a solid place, that center that's bigger than them, that's outside of them, that is this very firm foundation to stand upon. My opinion, your opinion, everybody else's opinions is very shaky, shifting sand, as the scriptures talk about. We need a rock, and
Yeah.
we can share that same rock of our faith, and that's not ourselves. That's not within ourselves.
Yeah.
Um, I can have a right understanding of myself, which says myself is often selfish and often, failing in the way I think or sinful in the way I act. And yet the rock is unchanging. And that's who I need to stand on and help others do the same.
Yeah. You have alluded to a couple things that, in my mind, just are so powerful. One is the sense of isolation when everything is about me and I am the
Yeah.
center. It's isolating, and our need for connection. That speaks to me about the enormous mental health issues that we see in our world, in our culture, among young people. And as we get into talking about gender identity, mental health and risk of suicide and so on are some, in fact, perhaps many of the primary reasons that so much the proponents of acting on those feelings with medical care and so on. And I have feelings about that. But you're talking about how that looking at it all about me is isolating and
Mhm.
impacting mental health. And it, let me give you a moment to talk about that connection. Which do you think is the cause? Which do you think is the effect? Maybe we can't sort that all out, but I think there's a very strong connection there that may be different than what, if I can say, progressives would have us believe.
Well, I think that again, we were made for connection with each other in community and in support is where we are healthiest. So there's an epidemic of loneliness happening now that's closely related to the mental health epidemic also. And I think that when we have lost how to connect with each other, how to relate well with each other, when we've driven people so within themselves to find the center of them of their world, it just falls short and leaves them and comes up lacking, that they haven't found the true security, the true identity that is found in a stability of objectivity in terms of defining who I am, why am I here, what difference does it make in the world. Those are basic fundamental needs of an emotional development and security that are often left out when we leave everybody to kind of come up with it on their own.
and that God is the only one who can define that most solidly. And you've referenced coming back to the rock.
Mm.
Um, in the whole gender identity, sexual identity arena.
Mhm.
You have called this a 5 alarm fire. And I'd like you to unpack that for a minute. And any thoughts about why you believe this is such a big issue right now? We are seeing information that the numbers of, for example, young people who are identifying as trans or LGBTQ, the percentages have increased a lot, particularly among young girls. And I'm interested in some of the whys. Why do you think that may be happening?
Well, I think there are several things. First of all, on a grand cultural scale, we have the fallout of the sexual revolution that continues to progress and advance and march us farther away from God's good plan of one man, one woman for together for one life. So you can kind of track back, several decades back where the big deal was divorce, and then the big deal was homosexual marriage, or I say homosexuality and then homosexual marriage.
Yeah.
And then here comes transsexual. So it kind of just keeps progressing farther and farther away. A farther of a swing that another topic is why I think we've got to turn back soon, or we're going to self-destruct. And I have hope that we could do that. So I think at some level there's been a marching away from continuing in that fallout of the sexual revolution that has made transgender confusion as popular as it is, and the LGBTQ, and name all the letters, and they're saying now up to 70 different possible gender identities. Well, there are two sexes, male and female, as he made them, but we continue to push out and push farther away. Part of why I think that's happening also culturally is because of social media. My friends who interview families who are struggling with children who are facing and want to change their gender, or
Yeah.
claiming to be something else, they say social media, and the impact social media has had on messaging, and I think on attention seeking. So we've always sought attention and needed affirmation, but social media has so magnified that we're wanting those likes and that attention, and you've got to be riskier, graphic, or more graphic. You've got to be something different than everybody else, so come up with yet another gender identity to get that attention that we're all seeking in a social media environment. And then also what happens with social media is that becomes real, and we forget how to live in the real, kind of back to that referencing ourselves,
Mhm.
but we've forgotten how to live in reality and live with who we are, because social media has made this virtual reality that's not real at all.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of it. And then here comes the industry along that says, oh, we've got the puberty blockers, we've got the cross-sex hormones, here's your sex reassignment surgery,
Yeah.
fueling this what seems to be offered as a simple solution. Great, here what we will just take care of it. I was reading recently a book of a well-known producer of girls material, girls dolls and books and all of this, and they're just saying just go to the doctor and get your medicine if you don't want to face puberty. It's just so simple. So the messaging of the industry is really preyed upon our PREYED,
Yes.
upon our children. And I think, and parents too, parents are overwhelmed and worried, but parents are also seeking that attention and living in a virtual reality instead of a real reality. And there's a lot of complexity. I don't mean to simplify it at all,
Yeah.
but just the fact that take the whole cultural shift away from God's good plan for identity, sex, marriage, and family, bring in social media to that, and then here comes the industry that says, oh, we've got this, we've got a solution for you just like that.
Yeah.
But then tie in all the politics, the political push and divisiveness of the professional organizations, the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatricians, that are saying this is good and fine for our kids. We've moved away from medicine into politics. We used to have doctors in leading these organizations. Now we have lawyers. There's just so many cultural forces at work here, and it's our children who are most at risk. As
Yeah.
I like to say, when the elephants fight, the grass loses. And that's why I call it the 5 alarm fire because it's moved so quickly and so many children being taken, by the whole storm of it all. So it's a
Oh,
lot.
the grass loses. That picture is sobering, but
Yeah.
so true. Um, as I hear you talk about that, I'm thinking too of what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. And culture has created stereotypes. And can't somebody be a woman without fitting what culture might say is the stereotype? Can't a man do the same? And shouldn't that be more where we express our individuality rather than, this medical care? You've alluded to the puberty blockers and hormones and surgeries and so on. I am also seeing now where sometime after, for those who have these treatments, they are regretting it at greater
Mhm.
numbers. Um, why do you have a problem with these medical treatments? I do, for especially for kids, but I'd like to hear some of your why.
Well, I think even in the terminology, it's frustrating that medical care is used, or gender affirming medical care is used for this class of interventions. And let's just kind of start with the medical care piece. Medical is for healing something that's ill or injured, is the way I think of it, right? Medical medicine is to heal those who are ill or injured. Well, what's happening in these, sex reassignment surgeries is healthy body parts being removed from young, boys and girls. That's not medicine, so it shouldn't be called medicine. Perhaps elective, plastic surgery or something, but not medical care as it's been positioned. It's been positioned as necessary for the health and well-being of those that are infected. So that's a problem with medical care. And of course, care is always going to be a nice, compassionate word that puts those of us who disagree of it as, sort of, we're evil or bad people. But then the gender affirming part, I think, again, good words, as the our opponents often seem to be ahead of us on words, but to affirm gender, there's so much confusion now around that term gender. I try not to even say it when we're talking about sex. We're talking about males and females, because gender has been so confused, by so many, we don't even know what the terminology is. But if we're going back to that idea about feelings and how I feel, and the fluidity that they speak of now with gender, we've got a moving target that we're removing healthy breasts from, or putting hormones that will sterilize you, um throwing at a moving target as if that's the solution. The other problem I have with medicine is it's very common. You hear them talk about evidence-based practices.
Yeah.
Then my daughter's in nursing school, she's learning evidence-based practices. Well, there is not evidence to base these practices upon, and we've kind of thrown that standard out the door for this category of care because of the cultural, because of the political, because of the dynamics of the day, and because of the industry involved too. But I think because we've thrown out the standard of true standard of care and true standard of informed consent, right? That's another really big medical concept, is informed consent. And yet 12, 13, 14-year-olds cannot possibly understand the risks for which they are consenting to. Cognitively, we know their brains are not able to do that, and yet we're throwing that out for this category of care. And those are my big reasons why I have a problem with gender affirming medical care. I choose to call it sex reassignment interventions, kind of a family of sex reassignment interventions that would involve the puberty blockers. Puberty blockers is such one that really upsets me because it kind of gets you started on this path. And I think most of us will recall our pre-puberty days and how frightening puberty sounded, and we none of us wanted to go through it, and how easy to say to a small child, well, you don't have to anymore,
Yeah.
and yet look at the data we have of danger to that child's body.
Yeah.
So just so many mixed messages, incorrect messages, and because of the choose the truth that you like, you can kind of latch on to one set of truth that works for you. And then, as you've said, here comes the fallout of those who are regretting it.
Yeah. I have wondered if the objectification of women is partly to blame, if I can use that word, for the rapid increase in numbers of young girls who say they don't want to be a girl. I'm wondering if porn has added to that, the pornification of our culture, that the image that most young people have of a woman includes sexual objectification. So if a 11, 12, 13-year-old girl sees her body starting to become, to develop characteristics that means she's a woman, why would I want to go through the rest of my life being objectified like that? I haven't seen a lot of people talk about that, but I'm wondering if that has added to some of the numbers that we are currently seeing.
Well, I think it makes sense that the devaluing of the female and what it is to be woman and everything that comes along with bearing children and our roles as females has been shifted for sure. But I also think we talk about two different ideas: gender identity and sexual orientation. To me, pornography affects more sexual orientation and sexual behavior, whereas the identity piece is really an identity piece. So the 12, 13-year-old that wants to become a trans doesn't want to be male or female, just wants to be binary, or some of those terms. That's an identity. That's an understanding of who they are. That's not related to sexual behavior even. And it makes me think about other identities, like when I was growing up, it was kind of the goth kids that were the smokers. My mom would say it was like the smokers were in her generation. There's always been a generation of kind of those seeking extra attention or didn't really have another place to fit in. Now they've got a place to fit in. They'll be, the trans clubs will take them in, and so I think about, oh goodness, especially the preying, again, PREY, on the autistic children, and some of those things that, and the socially downcast or outcast, and those struggling mental health wise. There's so much of that gets, now I have an identity. I'm not comfortable with mine. I'm not getting the help and support to really understand who I am. I'm just going to go trans, and there's my identity. So I think it's important to kind of unravel gender identity and sexual orientation, and the two different elements of that play out in terms of how we feel about ourselves, how we feel, period, in terms of sexual attractions, and then how our behavior manifests itself. Those are all different layers within this whole conversation that are quite complex. And
That's
I think
helpful.
it depends on, it affects how we interact with people also, identities, feelings, and behaviors.
Yeah, that's helpful. That's really helpful. Um, let's acknowledge that there are some who are struggling with gender identity in particular that truly are feeling a lot of distress. Um, from your perspective, what would be a wiser, healthier way for parents or other adults in that young person's life to address what may be some real distress?
Well, I have three little words that I use to talk about how to respond to someone, right? A child or someone you care with individually. Because
Yeah,
there's a difference when we're talking about reaching individuals or dealing collectively with issues.
sure.
How I speak about collectively about issues is different than I would talk to a family member who's struggling on an individual basis. So it starts with that. I do use that word individual. What individual circumstances, influences, experiences are impacting this person? We've got to go farther back than I think sometimes we do, into childhood hurts and adverse childhood experiences and all of that have what have brought this individual to this moment of pain.
Yes.
So individual dynamics need all, and that's layers of an onion unraveled for sure. And then I think also there are psychological elements that need to be considered that are often brushed over and not really analyze deeply what could be going on in there psychologically and psychiatrically, that need to be addressed, that we wouldn't want to just band-aid quickly over.
Yeah.
And then there's relational, so individual, psychological, and relational factors to consider, because relationships really, really matter. And you can disagree with someone and still have a close relationship with them, and that support, that love is going to be more important in their life than anything, because the more they feel judged or cut out or pushed off is going to leave them in further hurt. So I'm here, I'm with you, I'm going to help you with these individual and psychological pieces. We're going to get you the help that you need to get to a place of peace and healing and hope again. But I think also that's where we see love and truth come together, and Jesus himself came full of love and truth, grace and truth, that we've got to say what's true. And I am of the belief that, calling someone by a gender that they are not, or a sex that they are not, or calling them a name that they are not, and doesn't balance the truth with the love part of that. And I think we've got to, again, I don't want to just make an easy answer. These are very hard scenarios to walk through, but love has to have truth with it, or it's just sentimentality. Of course, love with truth without love is brutality, and
Right.
it's harsh. We don't
Right.
want that either. So we've got to prayerfully seek that love and truth in dealing individually, relationally, and psychologically with people.
Yeah. That's good. That's helpful. Last area that I want to talk about for a minute, for those who are in the body of Christ and care about these issues, whether it's leaders in the church, parents groups, educators. You're an educator, work in the public sphere a lot. What are some things that the others of us, if I can include myself, can fruitfully do in addressing this five-alarm fire?
Well, I'm going to say to work upstream, because my passion is in prevention and
Yes.
education. And there are so many truths that lay a foundation early on in the context of love and relationship. But are we proclaiming male and female? He created them. Do people know that's who made them, and that's how they were made? And I say people, but I'm talking about children. Do children know the security? I was at the Capitol in Austin a few months ago and saw a little girl, or so I thought, but ended up being a little boy, came to testify on one of the bills on cross sex hormones and intervention and all. And anyway, the short version of the story is this little boy went forward and said, "I need this care because I was born in the wrong body," as he read notes someone had clearly written for him at 8 or 9 years old. But that day I thought, what a terrible thought to be 8 or 9 in the wrong body. And
Mm.
yet that is a pervasive lie of the culture. And my thought that day is, where is the church? How have we protected our children from this horrible lie? Do they know they were fearfully and wonderfully made? Do they know they were made male and female? Do they know we're going to help them through these hard issues of the time? And do they know we were called to be different?
Yes.
That as Christians, we have a calling to be in this world, but not of this world. And we're going to have to fight some battles and stand firm on some things. And have we armed up our kids to do that? And I feel passionately about reaching them sooner with the truth about how their bodies work and the amazing anatomy of how they've been made and created, so they won't hear those lies and question their identity. So that identity and security that can be found in a loving home and in the loving truth from scripture in a church setting and all of that. I think that's where I feel how to kind of help put out that fire is we've got to get upstream. We're doing a lot of work downstream in the fallout. Thank goodness. We need the help of those broken and hurting to bring restoration and all of that downstream. But I feel particularly called to call the church to work upstream, and parents to roll up their sleeves and get talking sooner in their homes. May they hear it mostly at home. And then when we can add church and school, if we can get truth at school, which is a whole other conversation we can have
Right.
another day. But if we can get homeschool and church, our kids will be much more protected against the lies of the culture.
Mm. Lori, that gets me fired up as I hear you talk about that. Going upstream, working upstream, couldn't be more important. I want to thank you for the work that you do, for the time that we've been able to spend here together, and many blessings as you continue working in this really, really important area.
Thank you. I've enjoyed our visit. Happy to help however I can.
Check the links under this video. We have a link there to the specific faith-related resources at Beacon Health Education, where Lori Kuykendall is the director of. You'll find some very appropriate resources there around sexuality, gender, some of the things that we only touched on today. And this is just one part of what Beacon Health Education Resources addresses, and I think you will find that helpful. I want to thank you for watching this video. I would love to hear from you. If there's a question or comment you have about this, put it under this video. I read every one. If you'd like to get in touch with me confidentially, come over to our website, drcarolministries.com. Use the contact page there. I get those personally. It's confidential, and I respond personally. I would love to hear from you. And make sure you subscribe to our channel so you can get the resources we put up here every week. And until next time, may God bless you.